Alrighty. Hey gang. Welcome back, you guys. Another episode of Stove Chat, episode 48. And welcome. Happy Wednesday, y'all. How you doing? Hope you guys are having a awesome week. Bitchin' Wednesday. Wolf of Walmart. Wolf, bro, dude. Thank you so much for being here and for the fist bump from the chicken or whatever that is. That was pretty awesome. Miss you, man. Nice to see ya. Always learning. Thanks for being here. Welcome, everybody. So, welcome to another show. So, as you guys know, we're here to talk about masonry heaters, rocket mass heaters, rocket stoves, cook stoves, building your own wood stoves of various descriptions. And I'm Matt with Walker Stoves. You can check out my website in the description below. I got plans for sale for building your own cook stoves and stove heaters, boilers, all sorts of stuff. And we're here to talk about building them. Help people out if they're in the middle of builds, answer questions, talk story. So thanks for being here. Got a great group here, so if you got questions, it's a great place to ask. So with that said, if you are here to ask questions, by all means throw them in the chat anytime. I'm just going to be here chatting away, and we'd love to help you with your build. So by all means, just throw whatever you want into chat, and we'll address it as it comes up. So, Tall Shadow, welcome. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here from Canada. Hope you guys are having a good kickoff to fall here. We just kind of turned the corner with the weather, not just the date. It's just like, so it's funny how that, big holiday weekend or whatever really does signal the end of the summer. I mean, the weather here turned like that, and it's not cold. It hasn't really changed temperature, but where the wind's coming from and the smells and I just all of a sudden felt like I needed to get outside and start collecting firewood just because it's so habitual, instinctive that this time of year the leaves start falling, and yeah, you just kind of start getting itchy to get ready for winter. Must be instinct, huh? So, Two Trance, glad you're here, man. Thanks for showing up. Nice to have you here. So today, I thought we might go back and revisit. Well, I've got a few things I want to talk about, but one of the things I want to do is I wanted to go back and revisit some old cast builds that I did. I've got some photos that I kind of came across. Was like, oh, those would be fun to share. They're early batch box and even just pre-batch box experiments, and then also the core builds and kind of the builds around my original steel Walker stove that I took to Washington, D.C. So I thought we'd take a look at some of that. But before we do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about a building method that we don't talk about too much, and the reason it kind of dovetails nicely because these were all cast builds, but I wanted to talk a little bit about casting because we've really settled into this way of building that I think all of us have kind of found to be so simple and affordable, and simple is really the best way to describe it. It just doesn't take a lot of tools, it doesn't take a lot of skills, and that is building with bricks and ceramic fiberboard, combinations of those materials, some cob mortar type materials, but for the most part we can achieve almost any complex shape with really simple methods using those methods of building. However, that doesn't negate other styles of building, and there are quite a few folks who probably still are interested in playing with castables, and I do think that they're worth talking about, and I certainly enjoyed building with castables. Now, I think if you just want to get to a build that's burning, hey, Permaculture Playground, glad you're here, man. Thanks for showing up. So yeah, if you just want to get your stove built and burning, I do still believe for sure that the combination of bricks and ceramic insulations really are the fastest way to achieve that path with tested and tried and true designs. But there's sometimes, where people are going to be doing something different, have different construction ideas, have access to different materials, where they still may want to cast cores. And so I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. When I first really started woodshedding, as it were, and experimenting heavily, casting seemed to me to be really the way to go. And I quickly kind of found out that it's a ton of work and costs, it has pretty high expense. And at the end of the day, it's hard to iterate over and over using that method, because you just end up spending a lot of time and money to get each new iteration, whereas with the ceramic fiberboard and bricks, you can disassemble them and reiterate, without casting a whole new unit. So I did move away from it for the most part, but there's a lot of satisfaction in casting stuff. It's really enjoyable. For me, one of my favorite parts about it, it's sort of like my favorite and my least favorite, because it's where all the work is. But building the molds, there's a lot of work involved in building the molds, but it's really fun to sort of be able to shape things in, any sort of shape you can imagine as you're creating things out of these molds. And so it leads to some interesting experiments, and I'll show you one of mine. And yeah, it just leads to a little more detailed thought about the finishes and the shapes of the inside of your build. And as time has progressed, I've come to believe that matters less. Now I'm pretty cavalier with just these sort of square boxes and square shapes made out of ceramic fiber rectangles. That one's for you, Wolf. My rectangle bro. But now we mostly build things out of pretty standard rectangles and squares. But when your headspace is in that casting zone, you start to really think about, vortexes and curved spaces, and everything becomes like a Tony Hawk Pro Skater world with transitions everywhere. Come to find out, that actually is usually counterproductive. So it's sort of interesting the way that works. Your brain, you start thinking about flow, fluid dynamics, and you want to just round everything, and come to find out, like I said, that doesn't really, isn't the best thing, but we had to go through this casting process to get there. At any rate, the point of that rant is that casting really leads you to start thinking that way. When you're working with the boards and the bricks, you are sort of stuck into, rectangle shapes, and you are satisfied there. And as soon as you start to cast, like, oh, what if I, what do they call it? Port and polish this part and get the flow going better. So yeah, it says I'm buffering, so hopefully you guys can hear me. But we'll see. Hopefully it's holding up. At any rate, casting still, it has a lot of, there's pros and cons to all types of building, but I still think casting has a lot of pros that for some folks are going to be attractive. One of the things is you're basically building brick in your ideal shape. So you get sort of that durable, hard build, but in any shape you want. Now, as we talk about here a lot, that often means mass, or where you don't want it and things like that. But everything's a trade-off, so it's not always the worst. So Always Learning says, I've cast small, individual, lightweight, insulated, 15% clay, 85% perlite panels using plywood forms, and end product worked but fragile. Ceramic panels would be easier. Yeah, so that's a great example. Those are almost like insulated adobes. You're almost just kind of making sort of like low-grade clay brick, but adding a ton of perlite. I just wanted to say Rice Krispies because, right, when you build them, they just come out looking like giant Rice Krispie treats. And that's kind of what, if you haven't ever done this, that's really a great analogy and a great example. That's really what you're going for, something with a ton of airspace, a ton of, perlite as masonry rice in there, and just barely stuck together. And so, yeah, Always Learning. It's a really neat way to create yourself some insulated panels. They will be really fragile with that light kind of construction. You can try adding a little bit of sodium silicate. I've often just gotten that by adding a little bit of that. Oh, I forgot it, but it was in the Rutland tub. I think they called it Castable Refractory, but it's not. And it was also they sold it as a sealer or a mortar. At any rate, what it is it's a high alumina content refractory mixed with some sodium silicate, And if you actually just mix a little bit of that in with your mostly clay perlite or mostly clay sand, it'll give it some refractory properties, and it will allow it to set up a little bit when it experiences temperatures of, I don't know what they, of the appropriate temperature, but they'll firm up a little bit, and they will have a bit of a refractory action, so they'll sort of set a little bit harder than just the plain clay. They'll still be pretty fragile. The insulation does help though with cracks and things like that. So it's a fun way to go for things where you might not have any other options. And it can, as Always Learning just illustrated, it can actually be a really inexpensive way to build. For people who don't have access to much else, you really can just get clay and perlite. And while it's probably not going to be durable enough to do like a batch box that needs a roof over the top, it just might not hold up to that. But you can certainly achieve really nice burning J-tubes by just using sort of low-grade cast Rutland stove cement. Thank you, Tall Shadow. That's exactly what I was thinking of. By using simple cast panels, and make yourself a J-tube, actually for far less monetary input than if you had to even go buy fire brick. And I think you'll get, while you won't have as durable of a build, you'll have probably a better performing build. And you can see examples of that going back to one of my earliest rocket stove videos, where I show you how to build a cast 8-inch J core, where I just built a big box in a J positive mold out of hardy backer, and then just flooded that box with the positive mold down inside of it with clay and perlite. And it leaves a really kind of soft casting. And you need to patch it all the time, but it works actually really well, other than that caveat of it's not very durable to abrasion. So there's some interesting casting stuff. Now typically, if you're going to do a high-end casting, you're going to use a castable refractory product, usually found at industrial suppliers. They're used in all sorts of like boiler applications and industrial applications of various descriptions. You can find the materials at the same places you find ceramic fiberboard. And just like ceramic fiberboard, castable refractories come in a whole host of densities. And density typically can be paralleled with its temperature rating and insulative characteristics. So typically the higher temperature rating castables are more dense and so less insulative, and the lower temperature rating castables are typically less dense, more insulative. So we kind of want something usually in the middle of that range. We need some sort of medium-high temperature ratings, but we want them to be as insulative as possible with the least mass in our combustion zone as possible, so lower density refractories. So these are all, I'm kind of like getting off into the weeds with the technical details of the refractory, but it's important because if you go looking for this stuff, you'll see a big list, and it'll say 1750 Fahrenheit, 2000 Fahrenheit, 2200 Fahrenheit, and they'll give you density usually by pound per cubic foot, or pounds per cubic meter, something like that. And you really do, you want to search for the lower ones as much as possible, but still have the proper temperature rating. Now, with that said, one of the common questions, one of the things that I thought would be a great idea would be just to buy denser refractory and add my own perlite. And you'd think that'd be a great idea, but unfortunately it changes the chemistry and the balance of the original mix, and you typically, at least in my experience, end up with a product that doesn't have the stability that you want it to. That ends up cracking and usually just not having enough binding. And I suppose I could put less perlite in, and you could there's probably a point at which you can modify these things without too much downside, but for the most part you want to stick with the original recipe if possible. So when casting for rocket mass heaters, one of the biggest issues is that if you cast large pieces, they will experience big temperature gradients across those castings, and they'll crack, right? They'll be hot up here by the port and cool back here by the firebox door, And as the temperature gradient, the fire burns and the temperature gets hotter at one end and the other end hasn't heated up yet, and that gradient grows, they will eventually crack. So one of the important breaks so that you separate different temperature zones, and if you can, use smaller cast pieces that are joined with like shiplaps or other simple butting joints, that don't, that will allow you to have basically an expansion joint and not have a large span of stuff changing temperature and breaking due to heat cycles. Now, another thing you can do to help with castable durability is you can add materials that have tensile strength to help the pieces that you've cast resist cracking, or at least falling apart, even if they do crack, due to thermal cycling. And so in my early experiments, I experimented a lot with fibers like fiberglass, carbon fiber, composites, usually used in composite like polyurethane or polyester, epoxy type construction. But in doing that with refractories, you get the same type of composite structure. You have your setting substrate, and then you add your fiber to it for tensile strength. So in doing so, you can actually create some pretty durable pieces of refractory. Now, there's another fiber that's really the one that they sell in the refractory shops, and that is stainless steel needles, they call them. And they look like, they're usually like 2-inch long. They look like a straightened out staple, and they usually have a little bit of a they're wavy or corrugated, and that, what that does is the same thing. It's just those corrugations keep the give the castable something to hold on to, and there's no way for it to pull cleanly away, even though it doesn't really bond that well to that steel. It's just cast in there now, and those will span areas where there's cracks or anything like that, and they will keep that refractory slab or piece together. Now, I always thought that was strange that they made them out of metal, but that obviously, that's at the industrial scale, so I'm going to assume that those work great. I have ordered them. I've used them with great success. Like I said, it's just speculative that it doesn't seem like the metal would be as good as like the fibers, but they do perform great. So let me catch up with chat here. So 2Trance says casting multiple pieces is definitely a pro tip. My first one cracked because I casted the burn chamber in one piece. Absolutely. So that's one of the, I think we all probably do that, like the first time. As a matter of fact, that old video I'm talking about is the entire core basically as one piece. It was so bulky, it sort of made up for it, but it wasn't slabs. But that's something that I think everyone does at first, and then you start to realize that what the what's causing it to be torn apart. After you do it for a while, it's pretty easy to see like this spot getting red hot. Well, that spot's cool, and eventually you get a crack right there. So, and Permaculture Playground says, and the fibers hold up to the temperatures. And yes, Permaculture Playground, I believe they do. Fiberglass fibers, we use that as like welding, protective welding blanket, and it will hold up pretty well up to, I don't have something in front of me to tell me, but I'm pretty sure that well over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit anyways, up to like 5-6 C, they'll hold up quite well. And keep in mind, we're going to have them within the, cast within the refractory structure, and hopefully it's sort of an insulated refractory. So while the very, very, exposed edges that are exposed to the fire may get hot enough to deteriorate some of those fibers, I do believe that as you move through the slab, most of those fibers will never see temperatures that will deteriorate them significantly. And in addition to that, in building cob stoves, and especially using real cob with straw, something was discovered quite a while ago, that just the addition of the straw into a clay structure like cob, if you put that in a hot area, even if the straw burns away, there was something about the linear channel nature of the straw in there that oriented the clay plates, I guess we'll call them refractory. The ionic structure of the clay basically becomes, ionized, I guess would be the right word, and it orients, and you actually end up with longitudinal reinforcement even once the reinforcing fiber is gone. Not the same, obviously, but the point is that from everything I've read, there seems to be a benefit in adding those fibers, even if some of them will burn away. So I do think they'll hold up, though. And then you can also use, like I said, you can use carbon fiber, which I think has even higher melting points. They're not plastic. They're typically it's fiberglass, right? So it's silica based or carbon based, and so they really don't. It takes a lot of temperature to break them down. So Tall Shadow says, wonder how the J-tube that Peter developed, which only had a joint down the center, kept from cracking. I think, although I don't know for sure, Tall Shadow, that part of that would be trial and error in the manufacturing process. I'm not saying that it's impossible to have pieces like that, but it just takes more work. Now, Peter's what am I trying to say? Peter's specialty, like Peter made his living, his whole career, was as a model and mold builder. If I might have that a little bit mistaken, but I believe he was an engineering type model builder. And his J-tube that's made in 2 parts has particular features. He sold that, I believe, to Sandy at Dragon Heaters, and I did interact with her quite a bit during that era. And what I'm trying to say is it was designed carefully, Tall Shadow, such that it wouldn't. He had thick spots and thin spots in certain places, and they had worked out the materials to some extent. And again, I don't know that we've really gone back and revisited anyone that has had one for a long period of time and burned it regularly. I still suspect that it's probably likely they may have, some of them may have exhibited some cracking, but I don't know for sure. And one of the examples I'm going to show you is actually based very much on that, because my first batch box that I'll show you here that's cast was cast in that same way, just split kind of right down the middle, just like that. And that isn't to say, like I said, that isn't to say that things have to crack. Those stainless needles will go a long way. It's just kind of hopefully giving people the information so that they can create pieces that don't crack, or at least be ready for it if it does, and build in such a way that it's not going to collapse. That's kind of the main thing. So Two Trance says, Tall Shadow, I cast my second one in halves, and it has not cracked. So there we go. So there's some first-hand experience. And the spaces that are left from the burnt-out straw acts like a mild insulator. That's right, Tall Shadow. That's exactly right. I was talking about this material burning away and it giving it some strength. It also helps keep the parts that are beyond it from getting too hot, because it acts as an insulator, having that airspace in there. So Two Trance says he used a pill cast product and was able to keep it from cracking. And so that's really, in my opinion, an important part of that is using professional, refractory products and following as best you can, following their instructions on how to cure it, how to mix it, and all that stuff. So, oh yeah, and David, thanks for being here. David, I know, also has a big castable core. And he says he wrapped his castable riserless in a perimeter steel frame to hold the 4 pieces together, which is awesome. That's like exactly what I did. That was sort of my original concept when I was building my first castable cores, David, and my first Walker stove was that cast core contained by that metal box. Come to find out, it's just as easy, and you end up with almost the same thing by just putting the ceramic fiberboard in there. I mean, that's really how I got to where I am today. And we'll look at these builds and you'll see it, is that I was I built this steel box. I built this heavy cast core that took a ton of work to build. And then I put ceramic fiberboard all around it inside the steel box. And then it had a ceramic fiber riser. And I was like, well, the ceramic fiber riser, well, you know, why do I need the hard stuff here? So that's, you can actually kind of see the evolution of the way that we're, where we are now. Tall Shadows, this Peter was sure a pro caster. Yeah, absolutely. And, I really am just talking about this because it's something that I think most of us experienced builders have spent a lot of time doing, is casting cores, and you'll notice that almost none of us do it. At least, as our, at least in the test stage for sure, anymore, because we found there's much easier ways to move forward. But it's fun to talk about because it's still a real viable way to build. And with regards to the sort of imagination that the casting brings in to the picture, because like I said, now you can build positives and that can have shape. It's really sort of a different approach entirely, and it really changes the way you sort of look at these things. With all that said, why don't we take a look at, these are just going to be kind of fun sort of nostalgia picks for me, and some stuff you guys have probably never seen, because I don't know if I've ever shared some of these. These weren't part of any of my videos or anything. This was back, the ones that I'm showing now, these are back probably 2012, 2013, sort of maybe even earlier a little bit. This is kind of the run-up to the wood stove decathlon. They're a little bit out of order, but I'll try and give you sort of the basic breakdown of them. Now, at this time, I was exploring kind of using my outdoor half barrel benches and using that as my test bed. So anyways, we'll get into that in a sec. Let me address Ivan here. Ivan's got a question. He says, can you give advice on setting up coal-fired brick stove? Looks like I prefer coal over wood. Ivan, I am sorry to say I can give you sort of general thoughts that I have regarding combustion, but I have very little experience burning coal. So I'd be remiss if I tried to pass myself off as an expert. It's illegal to burn here in my state. I did live in Utah. I lived there for 2 winters, and one of the places I lived in one winter, we did have a coal burning insert, and so I have a little bit of experience with it, but not much. And I know that from my little experience, the air settings are so dramatically different than when burning wood that I do think you need to address it, completely differently than the way we do with wood. You can probably have some similar shapes, but for instance, with our wood rocket stoves, we're using pretty high velocity incoming air to act like a passive blower to then create, a really high temperature blower nozzle that's basically doing like a blast furnace type burn. And with coal, I think that's totally inappropriate, because it would burn so hot, it would burn so fast. When we would burn coal, at least in my experience, it was always more of a shut down style burn to try and get that long heat cycle out of it. And I don't know, I imagine that coal is just like wood. The more you smolder it, the dirtier the burn is. But I don't know that you could burn it the way that we burn wood efficiently. Obviously there's coal blast furnaces, but you're talking like forging temperatures. So I don't know enough about it, Ivan. I don't have much advice for you there. I think that in my experience, like I said, it's usually stoves with lower air settings. I think I'd probably start with some simple brick, containment type structures with some storage downstream. But beyond that, it would be fun to experiment and see what you come up with. I mean, you might just try some standard rocket layouts and see how they work. But I don't have real great advice for you on how to just put coal in a rocket design and start burning. So I apologize. Maybe someone in chat has more experience with me than Cole, but I think that for the most part here in the States, at least on the West Coast, it's you don't see it very often. And I'm not sure if you folks on the East Coast have much coal burning, like residential, inside solid fuel coal burning. Obviously it used to be a big deal, but I think it's just about gone away, and I don't know that many stoves, now, like I said, now all these clean burning wood stoves are designed to burn kind of hot and fast, and I don't know how that translates to the coal. So at any rate, back to the cast experiment. Well, let's just dive right into it. I'll just show you guys this stove. Oh, from Russia. Greetings, Ivan. Thanks for being here. It's awesome to have you. Yeah, I wish I could give you more info. Hopefully, if you do experiment with it, please come back and share with us what you find. It'd be really interesting to hear how it translates to rocket stove technology. So let's take a look at these photos. So this is, you can just kind of barely see in the, I don't think I can show you my mouse, but this is going to be the base plate of a batch box. And right behind it is, you can see the opening. I already have this half barrel bench all built. So I'm just going to build this front end and place it in front of it and stack it up. Now you can see I did some tricky stuff in my, these are my early castings. Again, this is like 2012 probably. So you can see I'm trying to figure out ways that I can just fit these things together. And I talked earlier about a shiplap. So in this case, I have a little tab that sticks up, and then I did do a little rabbet in the bottom of the side plates. Now, one of the things we were talking about earlier about cracking, if I remember correctly, these base plates did crack, and they'd usually crack kind of right here in the port section, which of course would be the hottest section. I made a few of these similar, never the same. They were always iterations. But so there's the base plate, and then you can see just one half of a side. Now at this time, I was experimenting with windows was my big focus here. This was at the time when the batch box was brand new. People were still saying you couldn't put windows in rocket mass heaters, and I was pushing pretty hard for the idea that you could. So my first experiment, these are some of my early experiments with windows. Now, what's fun about this one is this is such an obvious mistake. And I can't believe I didn't pick it up, but it just shows you how much of a rookie I was and how much I was learning what a beginner. But I cast this, and I cast it so that this window fit in here, and it was so tight. It wasn't cast in. I pushed it in there after the thing was done, but I didn't leave any expansion joint, right? And so that was totally a beginner move. The window cracked to pieces instantly. But not only that, it cracked this, obviously there's not much material here, but it cracked this refractory piece as well from the expansion. And so this is one of my first lessons in differing materials and expansion and contraction. It wasn't my first. I'd played with metal and stuff before and was aware, but I had no idea that glass was going to do that. So live and learn. Now this is early days. Peter still had the secondary air coming in from the top, and to make my casting easier, I guess or maybe we weren't even hadn't determined that yet. This is really early. This was active days on Donkey's board, and I think the batch box is really just in development, and so my secondary air is going right into the port. We know now that's a mistake. But at the time, it seemed like an easy way to manufacture it. And you can see again, I've got this little shiplap. I guess it's a shiplap, it wasn't rabbit, on both top and bottom. And I made this whole thing in just these 4 pieces, or maybe even 3. I don't remember if I cast the top. We'll find out in a second here. But the 2 sides and the base. And there you can see them, how they came together to form that whole piece. Now I set that on some ceramic fiberboard. So it's pretty interesting. Like, I already have ceramic fiberboard, but I haven't quite figured it out yet, you know, that I don't need all of this other stuff. But, you know, eventually I'll get there. So yeah, so I did. I cast a top, and then I put ceramic fiberboard on top of that. What a goofball. I should have done that the other way around. But as you can see, a cast top with those same shiplap joints that capture that, and it's probably got a cast hole in it and a cast hole for the secondary air, and then that window opening. So there's kind of how it comes together. This was one, again, I was experimenting with windows, so I wanted to have windows on both sides. This was kind of one of my outdoor seating builds, with the idea being that it's going to throw heat from the firebox, light and heat from down low, from three sides, the two sides and the front door. And then the barrel up top will, of course, heat all the air around the seating area, and then the seating as well was heated. I got to tell you guys, still to this day, this really was probably the nicest outdoor fire experience I've ever had. It really was capable of creating, like we would used to call it, the heat bubble. And it took an enormous amount of wood, which I had at the time. And we were, you know, young and enthusiastic, younger and enthusiastic. And, you know, we'd sit out there late into the night drinking beers and playing guitars and whatever. And it could be, I mean, here in Washington, it could be 40 degrees outside even, you know, in September at night, and this thing would just create this dome of heat, that metal barrel just blasting heat out into space, the glass heating your body with the radiative heat, and then sitting on those hot rocks. It was really wonderful. It really, really worked well. So you can see it kind of coming together. I'm starting to sort of think about how I'm going to finish it with rock and whatever. So it's a simple build, though. There's just a ceramic fiber riser sleeve sitting on top of the base core build. So as you can see, I'm starting to kind of put together the pieces where we're at now. I just still had a real, you know, labor intensive and expensive lower end, but I've already figured out you can just set this preformed riser sleeve on top and you're ready to go. So kind of starting to move towards where we are today. So here you see it kind of all finished out. And actually, let me go back for a sec. This is, oh no, this is it. I just think that I didn't do an arch on the front. Yeah, Tall Shadow, I thought you guys would enjoy this. Thanks for giving me some feedback. I hope it is it's interesting. It's old news now, but I think it's important to kind of retread this stuff, because sometimes you forget where you've been, and so this might help keep people from treading over old ground, or maybe give you some ideas of something you want to revisit. But so anyways, you can see how I finished it, and this actually, a lot of data from doing this I still retain and use all the time when I am consulting with you guys or with anybody in my consulting work here. Tons of stuff I learned on this build that still is relevant, and one of the most important ones is what we're looking at right here. Absolutely experimental, didn't expect it to work at all, but what I did was I put outside of that core, I don't remember if I put any ceramic fiberboard. I don't think I did. I think I just put hardy board. So I think that I just put a piece of hardy board here as an outer skin, and then I used Type S mortar, regular Type S tile mortar, to bond this tile to that hardy backer. And that's the same construction you'd use to build a shower or whatever. And so this is Type S mortar here in between the, oh, you can't see my mouse, but in between the rocks around the perimeter, those small kind of flat rocks, and that kind of backsplash looking tile that surrounds the window there. That's all that stuff is stuck on there with Type S mortar. Much to my surprise, that never failed. And I burned this thing a lot, and it was outside for a couple winters, probably actually 5 winters, but I used it for at least a few of those before it eventually got torn down. And incredible heat and cool cycles. You know, that thing must have been sitting there at 1,000 degrees sometimes. It wasn't that hot, but you know, the outside surface, I bet, got to 500 degrees on multiple occasions. And then it would freeze at night, and surprisingly enough, that tile facade held up to all that abuse. Outside in the rain and the snow and the freezing and the burned summers and winters, I mean, it was unbelievable. So to this day, I still feel like that's a really interesting option for finishing any of our builds, like even our brick cook stoves now. A sheet of hardy backer kind of fastened to those bricks. You can use masonry fasteners to screw it to the bricks, and it doesn't need to be sealed behind. That little bit of airspace would probably help with just a little bit of insulation. And then Type S mortar with tile over the front. As long as the tiles weren't too big, I think if you use big tiles you might have problems, but as long as the individual tiles were relatively modest in size, I think you can expect reasonable success with bonding and holding up to thermal cycling. So Tall Shadow says, looks like a toilet seat for the front door, and it certainly does. And what it is it's another one of these windows. I found these pieces of Robacks on eBay, and they were for some specific wood stove, and so they had an arched side, which looks nice when you put them that way. But since I used it here, and so it's got an arched piece. Now this door was just a dead simple piece. You can actually kind of see it right there, how it's just a flat piece of steel, like 12 gauge steel, and then there's just tabs that I bent out of it, and they clip that glass in place. You can kind of see them there, those little clips. So that glass piece is just clipped into a little really thin and flimsy steel frame, but it allowed me to attach hinges. And one of the biggest issues with this build, you'll see it right here, is look, I made how narrow I made it. There's no room at all on the front, you know, and then I just put hardy backer on the sides. So I didn't give myself any meat. It was dumb, right? Now I know way better. There was no way to mount a door because there's no face at all to that whole thing. So that became one of my challenges, was how to deal with that. So yeah, so here's the finish. It actually came out, for me, who doesn't usually do much finish work, it came out to be a pretty neat finished stove. And while I haven't pursued it, I would like to someday follow this idea kind of out to a nicely finished conclusion somewhere indoors. Like if I build myself a little Belgian Gulch style brick shack, you know, I might revisit this idea, both of a window down low, like a windowed stove, which I haven't really prioritized for a long time, and the tile finish. You know, that's just a pretty nice looking stove. Now here's an example of it in use. You can see I've got a friend here, a little chihuahua there on the couch, and a friend laying there, and you can see how well this thing obviously is throwing heat out. There's a barrel here throwing heat out, so just tons and tons of thermal action right there, and then you're laying, of course, on a warm bench. So while we are on that one, let me scroll down here, and in this same batch of photos, just bear with me, gang, I have the mold that I used for that casting. So here you can see on the, you know, right, I wish I could point this to you. I'm not sure if I can do that. Maybe, no, not there. Let's see, this is window capture. Let's see. No. I was hoping it would let me show you the mouse, but it doesn't seem like it's going to. At any rate, this is the mold that I used to cast that batch box, and it's built out of pink or blue insulation foam. You can see that in the back. Actually, you can see the materials in the background nicely. The pink and blue insulation foam make up the main body of the mold, and then I used foam rollers, like 6-inch foam rollers, for the riser castings. And you can see I just used like packing tape to tape this little window cutout onto the firebox, and then there's my port and secondary air piece. We're moving kind of right to left here, and then you can see the half riser there. And so to build both sides, I would just cut this apart and move these pieces to the opposite end of the casting board, and in that way I could get mirror image pieces out of that mold. So I do I have an image of casting this one? I don't think I do, but I have an image of casting the iteration right before this, and it's actually even more interesting. So let's go to that one. So before I figured out the foam, I was often using masonite or hardboard. So actually I just got the wrong one there. Let me get this one. So here's an example that I was talking about earlier of doing cool shapes. Now this is prior to the final iteration of the batch box. And so here I am experimenting with an early port that was offset and designed to create, in my mind, create a better vortex. Of course, that's a common thought, right? We all think that when we start that we're going to do a better vortex by shooting things in at a tangent to the right. Come to find out that doesn't work very well, but I thought this was an interesting example because you can really see how you can play with shapes here. So this is a window box that's out to the front. That's why those little pieces are out front, is it's blocking out for a window. And then the rest of that makes up the secondary air stuff, and it's there to mate with these riser sleeves. So Tall Shadow says, did you use any mold release agent and reuse of the mold or one-time use? So Tall Shadow, these hardboard molds were one-time use, and I would burn them out. The foam molds that I showed you earlier were multiple uses, and I would use packing tape, and then I would use carnauba wax as mold release. So I would just use car wax. You can buy mold releasing wax, and it's just pure carnauba wax. So that's all I did. I did also use, I was really experimenting with sort of advanced stuff. There was, at this time, I think we were using an EVA spray over some of these molds. I had been doing a ton of gel coat work in this time. I was working in the boatyard to the detriment of my health, and I was doing a lot of composite work, and so I was building at that time tons of like fiberglass molds, building water tanks and whatever people needed in their boats. And so we had EVA mold release, which I had a cup gun for, and a spray thing. And EVA, kind of makes like a membrane over stuff, and then it usually peels away. So I tried a bunch of different mold release tactics. The foam, the best method for mold release, in my opinion, with that was just packing tape to get a really smooth finish, and then just carnauba wax, and that worked really pretty darn well. But with these hardboard ones, I would just burn them away. So at any rate, this was an interesting design because this is my first Walker stove. So the first Walker stove I designed and built, I had thought up the metal. I'd been building stoves in my bedroom. I'd been trying to come up with like a portable wood stove style rocket mass heater, and I had come up with that Walker stove box, but the batch box wasn't, Peter hadn't published his finished stuff yet, so I'm kind of trying to come up with the core. And at Donkey's Board, we were all working towards the batch box, but we didn't know what the best shape was. So this one has this offset riser, and I think if I move through these, I think you guys will enjoy seeing this process. But there is my outer mold, that piece I just showed you fits into, we can actually go back and look at this a little bit closer. Here's some detail on this part here. This is really the port, and I remember that I tried to make the back side of the port, see how this slopes down and it's higher here. So the idea being that there would be the low lip of the port overhanging would be forward facing the firebox, and then this would be higher, so it would be in a vacuum, so there'd be a bit of a venturi there to draw air into the port. So you could add those details in the castings. You can see the way this slopes down right here. So there's that going into the riser. And then I build it in this box, and I'm going to fill the outside with castable refractory there. Now, I will vibrate the box using, usually what I would use is I use my reciprocal saw, a Sawzall, and I would just take the blade out and put the foot of it against the side of the box. That does a pretty good job of vibrating. I tried to make everything hollow so that when I burned things out, there would be some air to flow through and let this burn out. And Tall Shadow says they look really cool, only to be burnt away. And totally. And so this is a big part of why I don't do this anymore, is because, as you can see, there's a ton of prep work and work involved, not to mention the expense, before you even get to, close to a stove where these pieces could easily just be ceramic fiber, board, and you'd be up and running in an hour. Tons of work. Those molds, by the way, to fasten them all together, they were all hot glued together. So it was hardy backer and hot glue. And then a solid build here. Let's see, I don't know. We're just looking at my shop. There's a pallet of materials from offloaded off a truck from a company. There's ceramic fiber board in the boxes underneath the risers, and then bags of refractory. This was, I think, the thousands of dollars. But at the time I was really focused on experimenting. And right next to that you can see my box, my original prototype Walker stove steel box there. So I'm trying to get to, here we are. So here it is. It's now out of, I've taken off the outer mold, but you can see here's the inner mold still in here. Okay, this is that original box we were looking at. There's a little piece sticking out the top and the ceramic fiber riser. And you can see, maybe it's kind of dark, but you can see that window frame. So that was just made to connect with the outer mold. And in that way, it kept that window space open. I think I, again, hot glued that to the outer side. And I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm even taking a picture of here. Basically, it's just the Walker stove coming together, and I have two of them here, as you can see. And I tried two different cores, but you can see that cutout for the window there matches that window on the side of my core, right? So that's what this core was going towards. So eventually, that core drops into that lower trough, that lower piece there, and I start burning. And as you can see now here, I'm starting to just sort of document these early burns. This is before the wood stove decathlon. Peter's working furiously on documenting the batch box, and in probably just a month or two after building this one, I'm going to build the second iteration with a proper port centered into the riser, and that's the one that I'll take to Washington, D.C. But at any rate, you can see some of the handiwork that went into this. I used one of my boat building buddies. I hired him to do the TIG welding on there. I didn't do any of that TIGging, but he really did a wonderful job. And I still really like this whole concept and this stove. I think it's it's a viable concept for the right person in the right situation. But so there's the one I'm going to take to Washington, D.C. I just kind of dressed it up, painted it a little better. I keep thinking I'm going to get some pictures of the inside assembly in here so I can show you how it went together. But it doesn't seem like I am getting there. Let me scroll through up top. So no, it doesn't look like I'm gonna get there. But at any rate, it sure looked cool when it was burning, didn't it? I mean, it's really a spectacular stove. So that's my let me get back over here. All right, so that's the chat about casting and building things that way, and a little bit of a view into some of my old experiments. So that was just one little folder of old photos I found. I actually have, endless photos of all different builds, from my standard Cobb, Yanto style rockets to all these experiments. So maybe we'll revisit some more of that stuff going forward, because that is interesting. For sure, and hopefully it maybe can give some of you guys some ideas. Now, I do want to revisit the idea that I've now progressed to, I talked about it a lot as we looked at that. It was sort of easy to see the thought process of going from that. I was going from, okay, I need to cast my shape, but I need it insulated, and then it's contained in the steel. And you can see me start to remove bits, right, as I've progressed. Okay, we don't really need that casting. The outside ceramic fiberboard really forms that shape. In this case, the outside steel container is great, and you could retain that for this type of build. I found that I could share this more easily if I went to bricks, and offered plans, because it's something that anyone can do without welding. Or anything like that. So, you can sort of see the progression as we move forward. So this isn't to say don't build those or build them just like that or anything, but just, be aware that's ground that we've trodden already. And I think one of the most important things is, now that we've been doing things, we've been on this path of progression for quite a few years, I don't see going back to that. I don't think we've gone, okay, well, we've visited this and now we're going to swing the pendulum the other way. I think we're on the right track. Like, especially when I see like Belgian Gulch's recent builds, because they're so, they're just so simple to throw together. Just that brick or insulated brick, ceramic fiberboard, ceramic wool, 5-minute risers. We've really just sort of eliminated a lot of unnecessary stuff, a lot of question marks, and especially for people who haven't built them. I revisited, some old rocket stove forums this week, and I noticed that in some of the talk, there's still that sort of holdover from the old days of you just can't do it yourself. And I really take a strong stand against that. I know that we love community and we love workshops and all that stuff, but I really feel like we've come up with construction methods where we can encourage people to tackle these builds, even if they don't have 12 sets of hands to help, and even if they never have had experience doing it. And so this little journey of photos and casting and all that is, I think, a pretty good illustration of the idea that 10 years ago, we didn't really know how to build these in a simple way. And so you'd get workshops with 15 people needed to build one or whatever. People would, make a dump truck's worth of Cobb and, whatever. I think that we've progressed beyond that. And so obviously that's always been, my stated goal with this whole thing, is I really want to share this technology and spread it far and wide and make it as easy as possible for people to adopt. And so, I don't know, I guess we're just sort of revisiting some of that history, and hopefully, I guess what I'm trying to say is, hopefully it illustrates that we really have progressed and that things are much easier now, and that those of us who are at the end of this path and saying, hey, this is the way to build them now, we still aren't backtracking and saying, nah, we were wrong, go back and build them, that hard way. So yeah, don't be scared if you're thinking about building a stove. And with that, you guys, I've been chatting at you for an hour, so I am going to let you go. We are on episode 48, so I guess we'll come back next Wednesday, and do episode 49. In the meantime, I hope you guys have an awesome week. I hope you guys enjoy the coming on a fall here. Might be time to start thinking about burning. We'll get that fall feeling in the air. Football is going to start up, and I know that always gets me thinking about stoves. So yeah, so I hope you guys have a great week. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Really, really appreciate all your input and support. And by all means, please come around next week if you got questions, if you got builds. Send some pictures my way. I'd love to share your build and talk about this stuff even more. So thanks, guys. Appreciate y'all being here. I'm gonna hit the outgoing video, and I will see you guys next week. All right, see ya.